The Nevada desert stretched out before her, a relentless canvas of ochre and faded sage under a sky the color of forgotten dreams. November's chill was sharp, unforgiving, and it clawed at Sarah's threadbare dress. Each gust of wind felt like a skeletal finger, tracing the contours of her deep despair. Her belly, a prominent curve beneath the thin fabric, was a testament not to the cold, but to the new life she carried, a life she was carrying utterly alone. Her husband had abandoned her, finding the prospect of fatherhood too heavy a burden. Her family had disowned her, seeing only scandal in her situation. Sarah had become a ghost, haunting the very land that had once promised her boundless opportunity. Her days blurred into an agonizing trek across the cracked earth and desolate plains. Every stumble was a stark reminder of her fading strength. Hunger gnawed at her, thirst parched her throat, and the raw vulnerability of her situation pressed down on her like the vast, indifferent sky. Hope, once a fragile ember, had long since threatened to die out, leaving behind only the cold ash of resignation. But then, through the shimmering haze of her exhaustion, she saw a flicker. A lone light, a defiant star against the encroaching twilight, beckoned from what seemed an impossible distance. It was a small, solitary ranch. Was it her last, desperate prayer? Or perhaps simply the spot where she was destined to finally collapse? With what little strength she had left, she dragged herself towards it. The rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath her worn boots was the only sound breaking the overwhelming silence of the desert. As she got closer, the light grew steadily, revealing a weathered cabin, a small corral, and the looming silhouettes of mesquite trees against the fading gold of the horizon. The ranch was humble, almost invisible in the sprawling immensity of the desert, yet it radiated a warmth that seemed to pull her in, like a moth drawn to a flame. Her knuckles, raw and trembling, rapped weakly against the heavy wooden door. For a moment, there was only a pregnant silence. Then, she heard the low murmur of movement from within. The door creaked open, revealing a towering silhouette framed by the amber glow of a fire. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and seemed to possess a quiet power that emanated from the very earth beneath his feet. His skin, the color of seasoned leather, was stretched taut across high cheekbones. His eyes were a deep, fathomless obsidian, reflecting the dying light with an ancient wisdom. Long, raven hair fell unbound to his shoulders, partially hidden by the shadow of a well-worn cowboy hat. He was undeniably Native American, his presence as unyielding and enduring as the mesa that stood like a sentinel behind his home. Sarah's breath hitched, caught somewhere between a gasp and a sob. I need help," she managed to whisper, her voice reedy and barely audible above the insistent pounding in her ears. Her desperate, pleading gaze fell inadvertently to her swollen belly. His eyes, initially guarded, followed hers and softened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something akin to understanding, perhaps even compassion, replaced the initial caution. His lips, thin and firm, parted. "Are you well, Hishi?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, deep and resonant, like the distant thunder of a coming storm. The word was foreign, yet strangely comforting, and it hung in the air between them. Before Sarah could even attempt a response, her legs betrayed her. A sudden wave of dizziness sent her world spiraling into oblivion. She swayed violently, the ground tilting precariously around her. Just before she could hit the hard-packed earth, strong arms shot out and caught her. His grip was firm, unyielding, yet surprisingly gentle, an anchor in her storm. "Come inside," he said, his voice devoid of question or judgment. It was infused with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. He guided her into the warmth of the cabin, supporting her weight with an ease that spoke of immense strength. In that moment, as his unwavering presence steadied her trembling form, Sarah realized she had never encountered such steadfast courage, such silent, unshakable strength in her entire life. This man, a stranger in a desolate land, had just offered her refuge, no questions asked. A flicker of hope, brighter than any she had felt in weeks, ignited within her weary soul. What would become of her in this stranger's home? Her journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time she wasn't entirely alone. The cabin's warmth was a physical embrace, a welcome relief from the biting chill of the desert night. Inside, a fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth, its dancing flames casting flickering shadows that made the simple dwelling feel surprisingly cozy and alive. Sarah watched as the man who had found her, who had led her here, moved about the small space. He had gestured to his chest when she'd asked his name, and she understood it to be Coda, a Lakota word, she later learned, meaning friend or ally. He moved with the silent, fluid grace of a predator, yet there was no menace in his bearing. Instead, he radiated a profound, almost ancient calm that began to soothe the frayed edges of her nerves. He disappeared for a moment into the shadows of the room, returning with a thick, hand-stitched quilt. It was faded with age, the colors muted by time and sun, but it emanated a comforting scent of wood smoke and dried herbs. Gently, he draped it around her shivering shoulders. The rough wool, far from being scratchy, felt like a welcome balm against her raw, wind-chafed skin. The simple gesture of care was so unexpected, so foreign after everything she had endured, that it nearly brought her to tears. Next, a steaming mug was placed carefully into her trembling hands. The warmth seeped through the ceramic, a small anchor in the storm of her emotions. The drink was a rich, dark brew that smelled faintly of sage and something sweet, perhaps honey. He did all of this without uttering a single word, his dark eyes observing her with an intensity that was neither intrusive nor judgmental. He was simply watchful, a silent guardian assessing her needs. Sarah brought the mug to her lips and took a cautious sip. The liquid was warm and soothing, and it seemed to infuse her very bones with a newfound strength, chasing away the deep, gnawing cold. Slowly, the bitterness of despair, a taste that had been her constant companion for weeks, began to recede. In its place, a tentative sense of safety started to bloom, a feeling she hadn't known in what felt like an eternity. It was as though she was awakening from a long, terrible nightmare, the remnants of which still clung to her mind, like the fine desert dust that coated her clothes. She looked up, her gaze meeting Coda's across the flickering firelight. He had settled onto a low stool opposite her, his tall frame relaxed, yet still exuding that palpable sense of contained power. I don't know how to thank you, she finally managed to say, her voice hoarse and cracked from disuse and dehydration. Her eyes welled up with a confusing mixture of shame and overwhelming gratitude. The memory of her husband's cold, dismissive eyes, the echo of her family's harsh, condemning words, it all still stung. Their rejection made Coda's quiet, unconditional kindness all the more profound, a stark and beautiful contrast to the cruelty she had left behind. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Coda's lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It was a rare sight, and it instantly softened the rugged planes of his face, making him seem less like a stoic sentinel of the desert and more like a gentle, compassionate guardian. "No thanks needed," he said, his voice a low, steady murmur, as comforting as the soft patter of rain on dry, thirsty earth. He continued, "No one should walk this land alone." His gaze, devoid of any judgment, briefly and respectfully settled on her rounded belly, a silent acknowledgement of the precious cargo she carried, especially with 2 lives. His simple recognition of her pregnancy, offered with such quiet respect, was another small kindness that chipped away at the wall she had built around her heart. "My name is Sarah," she introduced herself, her voice gaining a little more strength, a little more clarity. Then came the admission she had been running from, the truth of her situation laid bare. "And I have nowhere to go." The words hung heavy in the air between them, a raw and painful confession of her utter destitution. She had nothing and no one. Coda leaned forward slightly, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers, holding her gaze with an unwavering intensity that spoke volumes more than words ever could. It was a look that offered solidarity, understanding, and a promise. "You do now," he said softly, the two words a soothing balm to her battered soul. He paused for a moment, letting the truth of his statement settle into the quiet space. Then he uttered the three words that would forever echo in the chambers of her heart, imprinting themselves on her very being with the weight of an unbreakable vow. "You're home now. You're home now." Those words, so simple yet imbued with such profound warmth and acceptance, broke something inside Sarah. A dam of unshed tears, held back by sheer force of will for so long, for so many desolate miles, finally gave way. Hot, silent tears streamed down her face, tears of relief, of exhaustion, and of a sudden, overwhelming sense of belonging. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her with such unwavering compassion. The first time anyone had looked at her without judgment, without a single probing question about her past or her plight. In that moment, nestled by a stranger's fire in the middle of a vast, indifferent desert, Sarah felt a fragile, tender seed of hope begin to sprout within the barren landscape of her heart. That night, she slept more deeply and peacefully than she had in months. The hard cot felt like the most luxurious bed she had ever known. The quiet, rhythmic breathing of Coda from the adjacent bunk was not a source of fear, but a silent assurance, a steady presence in the darkness. In the quiet solitude of Coda's remote ranch, the frantic desperation that had clung to Sarah for so long began to dissolve. Days bled into weeks, each one marked by a peaceful, predictable rhythm that was a world away from the life she had known. Coda's routine was as constant as the desert sun. He was up before dawn, his first duty to his small herd of magnificent horses, their coats gleaming like polished mahogany in the early light. He moved with a quiet efficiency, checking traps and hunting with a skill that left Sarah in awe. She watched him, fascinated by the reverence he showed for the land and its creatures, always offering a quiet thanks for any animal that provided them with sustenance, never taking more than was needed. He was a man of few words, yet his silence was more comforting than any hollow reassurance she had ever received. He never asked about her past, never pried into the wounds that were still so fresh. Instead, he simply accepted her presence, a silent guardian ensuring her comfort. He provided simple, nourishing meals of fresh game and wild vegetables he'd foraged himself. The cabin was always warm, the air filled with the comforting, earthy scent of burning mesquite. His actions were his language, a constant, unspoken promise that she was safe, that she belonged. As her pregnancy progressed, Sarah found her own ways to contribute to their shared life, though her hands, once soft and accustomed to the gentle tasks of a townswoman, grew calloused. She found a deep satisfaction in the honest labor. She mended clothes with careful stitches, scrubbed pots until they shone, and learned to bake the rough, hearty cornmeal bread that Coda favored. This was real work, grounded and essential, and in the stark, truthful landscape of the desert, it felt right. She began to cherish the quiet companionship they shared, the comfortable silence that settled between them as they worked. It wasn't an awkward void, but a space filled with a profound, unspoken understanding, a shared acknowledgement of life's most elemental truths. Coda remained an enigma, his quiet nature a veil over a deep well of wisdom. His dark eyes seemed to hold the knowledge of generations. Sometimes he would share fragments of his people's folklore, stories of the land, the wind, and the animals that roamed the desert. He spoke of the Great Spirit, of the sacred web connecting all living things, and the respect owed to every creature, every stone, every gust of wind. Raised on the rigid doctrines of organized religion, Sarah found herself completely captivated. His spiritual connection to the earth was so pure, so deeply ingrained, it felt more authentic than anything she had ever been taught. One evening, Sarah sat on the small wooden porch, watching the setting sun paint the sky in fiery shades of orange and crimson. The distant mesas were washed in deep purple as Coda gently groomed his favorite mare, a stunning buckskin he called Windrunner. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and sagebrush. In the peaceful contentment of that moment, a question she had held in her heart finally found its voice. "Why did you trust me, Coda?" she asked softly, her words barely disturbing the evening stillness. "I was a stranger, alone, and a burden." The shame of her past still lingered, a phantom ache that hadn't quite faded. Coda paused, his strong hands resting on Windrunner's flank. He turned to face her, his gaze steady and deep. "Not a burden," he said, his voice a low, firm conviction that resonated in the quiet air. "You are a spirit, Sarah, and within you, a new spirit grows. My people, we do not abandon the lone ones. And what you carry," he paused, his eyes holding a strange, powerful glimmer. "It is life. We honor life." In that single moment, Sarah felt a profound shift inside her. It was as if she wasn't just a guest in his home, but had become a part of the land itself, woven into the very fabric of his world. The cruel rejection from her own community, the heart-wrenching abandonment by her husband. It all started to feel less like a curse, and more like a twisted path that had unexpectedly led her here. It had led her to Coda, to this quiet, soulful refuge. She had arrived seeking shelter from a storm, a place to hide. But what she had found was so much more profound. She had found a home, not just for her body, but for her battered and weary soul. The desert, which had once been a terrifying symbol of her despair and isolation, was slowly transforming. In its vast, silent strength, she was finding her own. In its stark beauty, she was discovering an unexpected and enduring grace. As the weeks matured into months, the subtle shifts in Sarah's perception of Coda deepened. He wasn't merely a kind stranger. He was a silent teacher, an anchor in a tumultuous world. She learned to read the nuances of his expressions, the slight shift in his eyes that conveyed more than a volley of words. His quiet presence had a grounding effect on her, easing the constant anxieties that had plagued her since her abandonment. The desert, under his guidance, began to reveal its hidden beauty. The resilient wildflowers that bloomed after a rare rain, the intricate patterns of animal tracks in the sand, the majestic flight of an eagle soaring overhead. Coda saw the world through ancient eyes, and slowly, gently, he was teaching her to see it too. Their conversations, though sparse, were always meaningful. He spoke of his ancestors, of the Lakota people who had roamed these lands for generations, their lives intertwined with the rhythm of nature. He told her stories of resilience, of wisdom passed down through oral traditions, of ceremonies that honored the sun, the moon, and the spirit of the earth. Sarah, a woman from a world of rigid schedules and brick-and-mortar churches, found herself drawn into the fluid spiritual tapestry of his heritage. There was a raw honesty to his beliefs, a deep-seated respect for life that resonated with the burgeoning life within her. One particularly cold evening, snow, a rare and ethereal visitor to this part of Nevada, had fallen, blanketing the desert in a shimmering, alien white. The fire crackled merrily, and the cabin was filled with the scent of pine and brewing tea. Sarah, her large belly now a constant, heavy presence, sat knitting a small blanket from wool Coda had acquired from a distant trading post. Coda was meticulously carving a piece of wood, his powerful hands surprisingly deft as they shaped a small, graceful bird. "What was your life like before?" Sarah asked, her voice soft, breaking the comfortable silence. It was the first time she had directly probed his past, and she held her breath, unsure if he would answer. Coda paused, the carving knife momentarily still. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers, a flicker of distant memories in their depths. "Different," he said simply, his gaze returning to the wood. "My parents were of the Lakota. They tried to keep the old ways, even as the world changed around them. We lived on the edge of the reservation, learning both worlds. My father taught me the horses, the land. My mother, the stories, the plants. He paused again, a long, reflective silence. They are both with the ancestors now. There was a profound sadness in his voice, a grief that was ancient and deeply felt, yet utterly devoid of self-pity. Sarah felt a pang of empathy, understanding the loneliness of loss. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded, a brief acknowledgement. "It is the way. Life and death, a continuous circle." He looked at the wooden bird in his hand. "This is for the baby, for a swift and happy spirit." Sarah's heart swelled. His thoughtful gestures, his quiet generosity, were a constant source of wonder. "Why did you stay here, Coda? Alone?" He put the carving down, his gaze drifting to the window where the moonlight illuminated the freshly fallen snow. "This land," he began, his voice taking on a different timbre, a deeper resonance. "It holds the whispers of my ancestors. Their spirits walk here. To leave would be to sever a part of myself. I am the keeper of this mesa, of this small corner of their memory. And I am not alone, Sarah. The wind speaks, the stars listen. And now, there is you, and soon a new spirit." His words, profound and heartfelt, resonated with a truth that went beyond mere logic. Sarah understood then that Coda was not just a man living on a ranch. He was a guardian, a living bridge between the past and the present, his existence intertwined with the very essence of the land. His quiet strength was not just physical, but spiritual, rooted in generations of wisdom and an unbreakable connection to his heritage. And in his acceptance, she, an outcast from her own world, found a strange, undeniable belonging. She was not just a guest. She was becoming a part of his story, a new whisper in the vast, ancient symphony of the desert. The fear that had once consumed her had been replaced by a fragile, yet persistent, sense of peace. The baby stirring within her womb, a tiny, vibrant life, seemed to hum in agreement, finding its own rhythm in the heartbeat of this quiet, desert home. The pristine blanket of snow, an ephemeral beauty, melted as quickly as it had appeared, revealing the familiar tawny landscape beneath. Yet, something had shifted in the air, a subtle tension that Coda, with his innate connection to the land, felt keenly. News, slow to travel through the vast desert, eventually arrived. Whispers carried by passing riders, fragments of conversations overheard at the distant trading post. White settlers were pushing further west, their numbers swelling, their demands for land growing louder, their disregard for existing claims growing bolder. The uneasy truce that had existed between the native tribes and the encroaching world was fraying, threatening to snap. Coda, ever vigilant, began spending more time out on the mesa, his eyes scanning the horizon, his ears attuned to the slightest disturbance. Sarah noticed the change in him. The familiar tranquility in his dark eyes was occasionally replaced by a flicker of concern, a hardening of his jaw that spoke of impending trouble. Yet he never spoke of his worries directly, shielding her, and by extension, the child, from the growing unease. One blustery afternoon, as the wind whipped dust devils across the yard, Sarah found Coda sharpening his hunting knife, his movements precise and methodical. The rhythmic rasp of steel against stone was the only sound in the cabin. Her heart gave a sudden lurch. The sight of the keen blade, reflecting the dim light, brought a wave of unease. "Is something wrong, Coda?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Her hand instinctively went to her swollen belly, a protective gesture. He paused, testing the edge of the blade with his thumb. His gaze was distant, as if seeing beyond the walls of the cabin into the turbulent future. "The world outside is restless, Sarah," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Like a trapped bison, it will soon charge. There will be consequences." He didn't elaborate, but the implication was clear. Consequences for his people, for their way of life, and perhaps for this small, fragile haven they had found. A knot tightened in Sarah's stomach. The peace she had found here felt suddenly vulnerable, threatened by forces far beyond their control. Will we be safe here? The question was barely a whisper, imbued with a desperation she couldn't hide. Coda finally looked at her, his eyes unblinking, serious. This mesa has stood for generations, he stated, his voice carrying the weight of ancient resolve. It has seen many storms. We will face this one too. I will keep you safe, Sarah. Both of you. His gaze dropped to her belly, a silent vow passing between them. It wasn't a casual promise. It was a sacred oath, etched in the solemnity of his gaze. In that moment, Sarah understood the depth of his commitment. This quiet, stoic man who had taken her in when no one else would, was now pledging to protect her and her unborn child against an uncertain and dangerous world. A wave of profound emotion washed over her, not just gratitude, but something deeper, something akin to a fierce, protective love for this man who asked for nothing and offered everything. The tension in the air persisted, a low hum beneath the surface of their daze. Coda began teaching Sarah small things: how to identify edible plants that grew hidden in the crevices of the rocks, how to track small game by the nearly invisible signs they left. He taught her the wisdom of observing, of listening to the land, of understanding its subtle warnings. He even showed her how to handle a small, well-maintained rifle, its weight surprisingly heavy in her trembling hands. This is not for aggression, he explained, his voice calm and steady. It is for protection. Always remember that. Life is precious. His patience was endless, his movements deliberate as he guided her through the basics of loading and aiming. Sarah, who had never touched a firearm in her life, found a strange confidence emerging, a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. She was learning not just to survive, but to be strong, to be resilient, just like the desert itself. Coda was not just building a sanctuary. He was building her spirit, fortifying her for whatever lay ahead. The approaching storm was not just one of human conflict. It was also the storm of new life. Sarah's body was preparing, her movements becoming slower, more deliberate. Coda, noticing every subtle change, began to prepare the cabin. He gathered extra herbs for healing, boiled water daily, and meticulously cleaned every corner, as if preparing a sacred space. His quiet attentiveness, his unwavering presence, was a constant comfort. He was a silent anchor, a steadfast rock in the turbulent sea of her anticipation and fear. And as the distant echoes of a changing world grew louder, the small ranch on the mesa became not just a refuge, but a crucible forging an unbreakable bond between a solitary cowboy, an abandoned woman, and the new life poised to enter their world. The night the pains began was heralded by a particularly fierce dust storm, the wind howling around the cabin like a hungry wolf. The desert, usually serene, seemed to mirror the turmoil in Sarah's body. The contractions started subtly, a dull ache that intensified with alarming speed, seizing her with a primal force she had never imagined. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped her heart. She was alone in this, with only Coda, a man whose experience with childbirth, she assumed, was non-existent. She cried out, a raw, involuntary sound, and Coda was instantly by her side. His face, usually a mask of calm, showed a flicker of concern, but his hands were steady, his presence unwavering. He had already prepared, his foresight a testament to his quiet strength. Clean linens were spread, water was boiling over the fire, and a small pouch of fragrant herbs simmered gently, filling the air with a soothing aroma. "Breathe, Sarah," he commanded softly, his deep voice cutting through her agony. "Breathe with the wind." He sat beside her, his large, calloused hand finding hers, his fingers lacing with hers in a grip that was both firm and comforting. His touch was electric, a lifeline in the swirling darkness of her pain. Hours bled into an eternity. The pain was relentless, a monstrous wave crashing over her again and again, threatening to drown her. Sarah cried out. She thrashed. She pleaded. At times she felt herself slipping away, the world fading into a dizzying kaleidoscope of agony and exhaustion. But each time, Coda's voice, steady and soothing, pulled her back. He spoke to her in his native tongue, words she didn't understand but whose rhythm and melody seemed to carry an ancient strength, a promise of endurance. He wiped her brow with a cool cloth, offered her sips of water, and never once let go of her hand. There was a moment, in the throes of a particularly brutal contraction, when Sarah felt utterly broken, consumed by the pain. "I can't," she gasped, tears streaming down her face, her voice raw with despair. "I can't do this, Coda." He leaned closer, his dark eyes intense, unwavering. "You are strong, Sarah," he said, his voice a powerful whisper. "Strong like the desert stone, strong like the spirit within you. Listen to your body, listen to the child. They will guide you." He didn't preach or scold. He simply empowered her, reminding her of an inner strength she had forgotten she possessed. His quiet presence, his unshakable calm, was a powerful anchor. He moved with an intuitive grace, seeming to anticipate her needs before she even voiced them. He had a natural understanding, a deep-seated connection to the rhythm of life that transcended any formal training. Sarah felt a profound trust in him, a surrender to his silent guidance. This was not a stranger. He was her protector, her guide, her strength in the deepest, most vulnerable moment of her life. Finally, as dawn began to paint the sky in hues of pale pink and nascent gold, a different kind of sensation seized Sarah. A burning, pushing urge that demanded everything she had left. With one last Herculean effort, a cry tore from her throat, raw and triumphant. And then silence. A profound, sacred silence that stretched for a heartbeat. Then a tiny, indignant wail. A baby. Tears, hot and joyous, streamed down Sarah's face. Exhaustion weighed her down, but a surge of pure, unadulterated love, fiercer than any pain, washed over her. Coda, his face now etched with relief and a rare, soft smile, gently placed the tiny, red-faced infant onto her chest. A girl. Small, perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny, grasping fingers. Sarah held her, utterly mesmerized, her heart overflowing. She looked up at Coda, her vision blurry with tears, and saw a warmth in his eyes she had never witnessed before, a tenderness that transformed his rugged features. He looked at the baby, his gaze lingering with a profound reverence, a silent blessing. "She is beautiful, Sarah," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "A new dawn has come." In that moment, nestled in the humble cabin, surrounded by the quiet vastness of the desert, 3 souls were bound together. The fierce love of a mother, the quiet strength of a protector, and the innocent cry of a new life. Coda had not just helped her through childbirth. He had witnessed the miracle with her, sharing a bond that transcended words, a silent promise solidifying in the quiet dawn. The days following the birth of her daughter were a kaleidoscope of exhaustion and pure, unadulterated joy for Sarah. Her body ached, but her heart sang with a new, fierce love. The little girl, whom Sarah tentatively named Lily, a small, resilient flower blooming in an unexpected place, was a constant source of wonder. Her tiny yawns, her miniature grasping fingers, the soft murmur she made while nursing, filled the cabin with a new, vibrant energy. Coda was a quiet, attentive presence, always nearby. He moved with even greater softness, his steps hushed, his voice a gentle murmur when he spoke to the baby. He would often sit by the fire, simply watching Lily sleep in her cradle, a small handmade wooden bassinet he had crafted with surprising skill. There was a profound tenderness in his gaze, a protective warmth that settled deep in Sarah's heart. One sunny afternoon, as Lily slept peacefully, Sarah found Coda sketching in the dust with a stick, lost in thought. She joined him on the porch, a comfortable silence stretching between them. "She needs a middle name," Sarah mused softly, looking at her sleeping daughter. Something that truly fits her." Coda looked up, his dark eyes thoughtful. In my culture, names are chosen for their meaning, for the spirit they embody, he explained, his voice low. For a new life, a name that speaks of hope, of beginning. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the vast expanse of the desert. She came with the dawn, yes? After the storm. Sarah nodded, remembering the dramatic night. Yes, just as the sun was rising. Then perhaps, Anpao, Coda suggested, the word soft, lyrical. It means dawn in Lakota, or Wapaha, for a new sun. Sarah considered the names, rolling them over in her mind. Anpao, dawn. It was perfect. It spoke of new beginnings, of light after darkness, of the hope that Lily embodied. Lily Anpao, she whispered, testing the name. It felt right, a beautiful blend of her own heritage and the land that had given them refuge. It's beautiful, Coda. Thank you. A rare, genuine smile spread across Coda's face, a smile that reached his eyes, making them sparkle with a deep, quiet joy. It was a smile that melted Sarah's heart, a glimpse into the profound kindness hidden beneath his stoic exterior. In that moment, watching him smile at the mention of their daughter's new name, Sarah felt a profound shift within herself. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something far deeper, a tender affection that had slowly but irrevocably taken root in the fertile ground of her wounded heart. As the weeks turned into months, Lily grew, her tiny cries turning into coos, her bright eyes following Coda's movements with an almost uncanny intuition. Coda, the quiet cowboy, had transformed into a gentle, protective figure, a silent guardian for the mother and child. He would hum soft, ancient tunes to Lily while she slept, melodies that spoke of wind and stars and distant horizons. He would carefully craft tiny wooden toys for her, small animals that were smooth to the touch, imbued with a quiet magic. Sarah watched him, her heart swelling with an emotion she hadn't dared to name. He was more than a friend, more than a protector. He was family. He had built a home for them, not just with wood and stone, but with his quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, and his profound acceptance. The scars of her past, the abandonment and betrayal, began to fade, slowly healed by the gentle rhythm of life on the mesa, by Coda's steadfast presence. The fear of the outside world, though still a distant rumble, seemed less daunting now. They were a unit, a small, unconventional family, forged in the crucible of hardship and compassion. Sarah knew with a certainty that resonated deep in her bones that she had found not just a sanctuary for her child, but a home for her own heart. And Coda, the quiet keeper of the mesa, was the very foundation of it. The barren desert had yielded not despair, but a vibrant, enduring love, blossoming in the most unexpected of places, nourished by the tender care of a silent cowboy. Years rolled by, marked by the changing seasons of the desert, each one bringing its own challenges and its own blessings. Lily Anpao grew into a spirited little girl, her dark eyes sparkling with curiosity, her laughter echoing through the quiet canyon like the chime of wind chimes. She had Coda's steady gaze and Sarah's quick wit, a perfect blend of the two souls who had given her life and a home. She learned the ways of the desert from Coda, tracking lizards, identifying plants, and listening to the stories the wind carried. She would sit on his lap, her tiny fingers tracing the lines on his weathered face, listening intently to his tales of the ancestors, of the buffalo, and of the Great Spirit. Sarah, too, had transformed. The fragile, desperate woman who had knocked on Coda's door was gone, replaced by a strong, resilient woman whose hands were capable, whose heart was full. She had learned to ride a horse with confidence, to shoot with accuracy, and to navigate the desert trails like a native. Her connection to Coda had deepened into an unspoken language, a bond forged in shared experience, mutual respect, and a profound, unwavering love. Their love was not one of grand declarations or passionate embraces in the conventional sense. It was a love that manifested in the quiet comfort of their shared silences, in the worried glance exchanged when a distant dust cloud appeared, in the gentle brush of hands as they worked side by side. It was a love built on trust, on acceptance, on the simple, undeniable truth that they belonged together, a family sculpted by the harsh realities of the Wild West, but held together by the gentle strength of their hearts. One crisp autumn evening, as Lily chased fireflies near the creek bed, Coda and Sarah sat on the porch swing, the air cool and scented with sage. The sunset painted the sky in magnificent strokes of purple and gold, a familiar, comforting sight. "She is growing fast," Sarah mused, her voice soft, a wistful smile playing on her lips. "Soon she'll be wanting to explore beyond the mesa." Coda nodded, his gaze distant, yet filled with a profound warmth. "The world is wide. She will find her path. We have given her strong roots." Sarah turned to him, her eyes searching his. "And you, Coda," she began, her voice tinged with a delicate vulnerability. "You gave us roots. You gave us everything." She paused, then took his strong, calloused hand in hers, intertwining their fingers. "You never asked for anything in return." Coda turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers, a depth of emotion swirling within them that took her breath away. There was no need for words, no grand pronouncements. His gaze alone was a promise, a testament to the quiet, powerful love that had grown between them. "You gave me everything too, Sarah," he finally said, his voice a low, rough whisper, filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "You brought life back to this place, to this heart." He paused, then squeezed her hand gently. "You made this land, truly, home." Lily's joyous laughter drifted towards them from the creek, a bright, clear sound that resonated with the profound truth of their existence. Sarah leaned her head on Coda's shoulder, a sense of absolute peace settling over her. She had arrived at this door pregnant and alone, desperate and broken, a woman cast out by her own kind. She had knocked on a stranger's door, on the doorstep of a solitary Native American cowboy. And in his quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, and his profound, unconventional love, he had not only opened his door, but had opened his heart, offering her a sanctuary that had blossomed into the truest home she had ever known. The desert, vast and unforgiving, had, in its own mysterious way, brought them together, two lone spirits, finding solace and strength in each other. Coda, the keeper of the mesa, had become the keeper of her heart, and the promise he made on that fateful night, "Your home now," had become the foundation of a love story as enduring and timeless as the ancient lands they now called their own. This was their story, woven into the fabric of the Wild West, a testament to love found in the most unexpected of places, a testament to the enduring power of human connection and the profound grace of a quiet heart.